Your question to President Reagan.
Mr. President, I want to raise an issue that I think has been lurking out there for 2 or 3 weeks and cast it specifically in national security terms. You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuba Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make aid. If I still have time, I might add, Mr. Truitt, I might add that it was Seneca or it was Cicero, I don't know which, that said, if it was not for the elders correcting the mistakes of the young, there would be no state.
Mr. President, I'd like to head for the fence and try to catch that one before it goes over, but I'll go on to another question.
But it is a matter of historic record. On our way here in Air Force One, I was looking down over your countryside out here because most of the way from Oklahoma, I was looking down at clouds. And I could say that it reminded me of a story, but actually I wanted to tell the story whether anything reminded me or not. It was about a fella that was driving down a country road, and all of a sudden I looked out, and there beside him was a chicken. He was doing about 45, and the chicken was running alongside. So he stepped on the gas, he got it up to about 60, and the chicken caught up with him and was right beside him again, and then he thought, as he was looking at him, that the chicken had 3 legs. But before he could really make up his mind for sure, the chicken took off out in front of him at 60 miles an hour and turned down a lane into a barnyard. Well, he made a quick turn and went down into the barnyard, too, and there was a farmer standing there. And he asked him, he said, did a chicken come past you? And he said, yeah. Well, he said, am I crazy, or did the chicken have 3 legs? He says, yep, it's mine. He says, I breed 3-legged chickens. And the fellow said, for heaven's sakes, why? Well, he says, I like the drumstick, Ma likes the drumstick, and now the kid likes the drumstick, and we just got tired of fighting for him. And the driver said, well, how does it taste? He says, I don't know. I've never been able to catch one. Well, seriously, since... Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you. As Henry VIII said to each one of his 6 wives, I won't keep you long. I spoke of the difference between our 2 countries. I try to follow the humor of the Russian people. We don't hear much about the Russian people. We hear about the Russian leaders. But you can learn a lot because they do have a sense of humor, and you can learn from the jokes they're telling. And one of the most recent jokes I found kind of, well, personally interesting. Maybe you might tell you something about their country. The joke they tell is that an American and a Russian were arguing about the differences between our 2 countries. And the American said, look, in my country, I can walk into the Oval Office, I can hit the desk with my fist and say, President Reagan, I don't like the way you're governing the United States. And the Russian said, I can do that. The American said, what? He says, I can walk into the Kremlin, into Brezhnev's office, I can pound Brezhnev's desk, and I can say, Mr. President, I don't like the way Ronald Reagan is governing the United States. Incidentally, I've got a news item for you. We have a spin-off from our Star Wars research. It's a helmet for me to wear at press conferences. All I do is push a button and it shoots down incoming questions. You have to admit, though, that my attitude is better than linebacker George Atkinson's when he was with the Oakland Raiders. Someone asked him what the players' reaction would be if the press box blew up. He said we'd have 30 seconds of respectful silence and then continue with enthusiasm. Now, honest, I don't feel that way. Thank you. And you've already, it's kind of been touched upon here that, speaking of old times, you may have heard that tomorrow is my birthday. Now you know about that. I prefer to think of it as the 36th anniversary of my 39th, but I'll be just about due for a midlife crisis. In fact, I'm thinking about a career change. Drop this political business and see if I can't do something different like radio or the movies. Well, maybe I'll give politics another 3 years. This time of the year always tends to be a summing up time for me. It's been swearing in time, and the new year every year, and a birthday, the 36th anniversary of my 39th birthday. I always think age is relative. There was once a very famous baseball pitcher, Satchel Paige, and no one quite knew how old Satchel was, but he still was throwing that ball. And somebody asked him about that, and his wise answer was, "How old would you be if you didn't know how old you were?" And that's how I came up with 39. Well, the late Jack Benny had something to do with that. He was 39 for more than 40 years. I can't close without one story about doctors that he will understand very well. Have you ever noticed how easy it is if you're introduced to someone at a party or a dinner or something and he's introduced as doctor? And then there's always those people that suddenly start saying, "Doctor, I've been having..." Well, we had a fellow in show business, Moss Hart, the playwright, who was an inveterate along that line. And so one night at a cocktail party in Hollywood, he was introduced to a Dr. Jones. And almost immediately he started talking about, "I've been having this low back pain." And the fellow that introduced them said, "Moss, Dr. Jones is a doctor of economics." And that didn't stop Moss at all. He said, "Doctor, I was buying some stock the other day." No. Well, I don't want to go on too long. This is, after all, Las Vegas. And outside just a moment ago, I saw a fella trading 10 passes to the Reagan talk for 1 ticket to Frankie Valley. And by the way, on the matter of the INF treaty, I told the Senate not to worry about verification. I told them I'd take care of it. And while Gorbachev was here, I even made him write 100 times, "I will not cheat, I will not cheat." Oops. Well, now, during my presidency, I've always emphasized diplomacy. But sometimes it comes to the point you have to use force in foreign affairs. And here I am, arm wrestling General Noriega for Panama. We really enjoyed our trip to China, and we're amazed that the population was over 1 billion people. And as you can see here, the lines are terrible. On another trip, the government of Indonesia gave us these gifts, and they're our friends. Actually, I love this shirt. I finally found something louder than Sam Donaldson. And speaking of the press, remember during the Contra Aid vote when the networks wouldn't let me on the air? I bet you wondered how I finally got my message out. It's no secret that the press and I sometimes don't get along. In addition to my standard ploy of using helicopter noise to avoid reporters' questions, I've now added a new method to avoid questions: tear gas. I've loved almost every minute I've been in office, although there were a couple of trips to the hospital. In case you're wondering what happened here, I had just said, "So, Don, you say you're going to write a book." One of my greatest enjoyments is talking to the young men and women who defend us from attack. Here I am on top of the White House, and the soldier's explaining where he thinks the next book will come from. It's fortunate that not everything has been spilled in these books, however. I hope the environmentalists never find out about this one. We used to fly Air Force One over Wyoming low and shoot buffalo from the window. But I'll tell you someone I trust totally, George Bush. He's been a wonderful vice president, and he'll make an excellent president. And that's why I endorsed him and why I'll work hard for him this fall. Here we are listening to one of his speeches. You here tonight do good, hard, creative work, and I respect that too. So, as we say our farewells here tonight, this salute's for you. Now, thank you very much, but I think George and I should be applauding you. I thought it'd be good to get together now that we've all rested from our summer vacations. Although it's true summer vacations aren't always restful, you know that leads to a story. There was a fellow that was on his way to a mountain resort, and a policeman stopped him and said, "Did you know that you're driving without taillights?" And the driver hopped out of the car. He was so badly shaken that the officer took pity on him and said, "Well, now, wait a minute, calm down. It's not that serious an infraction." The fellow said, "It may not mean much to you, but to me it means I've lost my trailer, a wife, and 4 kids." I was in Las Vegas some years ago to address the annual Farm Bureau meeting. And on my way to the hall, a fellow recognized me and asked what I was doing in Las Vegas. And I told him I was there, what I was there for. And he said, "What are a bunch of farmers doing in a place like Las Vegas?" And I couldn't resist. I said, "Buster, they're in a business that makes a Las Vegas crap table look like a guaranteed annual income." There's a story about a pig and a chicken. They got tired of farm life, decided to find jobs in town. They no sooner arrived in town when the chicken spotted a sign in the window of a restaurant. It said ham and eggs, $1.25. The chicken suggested they go in and apply. And the pig said, wait a minute. For you, this job only requires a contribution. For me, it's a total commitment. I can't resist. I'm accused, and certainly in some elements accuse me of too much of telling anecdotes and so forth. But I think it'd be appropriate before I say anything else that one of my favorite stories about government had to do with an employee who sat at a desk and papers came to his desk. He read them and determined where they were to go and initialed them and sent them on. And one day a classified document came there, but it came to him, so he read it, initialed it, and sent it on. 24 hours later, it came back to him with a note attached that said, you weren't supposed to see this. Erase your initials and initial the erasure. But even Howard Baker's writing a book about me. It's called 3 by 5, The Measure of a Presidency. Mike Devers, in his book, said that I had a short attention span. Well, I was going to reply to that, but what the hell, let's move on to something else. Now, George Bush is doing well. George has been a wonderful vice president, but nobody's perfect. I put him in charge of anti-terrorism, and the McLaughlin Group is still on the air. But with so much focus on the presidential election, I've been feeling a little lonely these days. I'm so desperate for attention, I almost considered holding a news conference. I've even had time to watch the Oscars. I was a little disappointed in that movie, The Last Emperor. I thought it was going to be about Don Reagan. Now, one example is a story they tell. You have to wait 10 years there for delivery after you order an automobile. And so a fella had finally gotten the money together and was going to buy an automobile. Only about 1 out of 7 families have them in that country. And he went through all the paperwork and everything and finally signed the last paper, laid down his money, and then the man behind the counter said, come back in 10 years and get your automobile. And the man said, morning or afternoon? And wait. The fellow behind the counter says, well, what difference does it make 10 years from now? And he said, well, a plumber's coming in the morning. I know that some of you are no beginners when it comes to writing headlines. There was a time that being a Republican in this area of the country felt a little bit like being Gary Cooper in High Noon. Outnumbered in a big way. I remember the story of the fellow here a while ago who was running for Congress as a Republican. He stopped by a farm to do some campaigning, and when the farmer heard he was a Republican, his jaw dropped, and he said, wait right here. He said, while I get Ma. She's never seen a Republican before. So he got Ma, and the candidate looked around for a podium to give his speech from. The only thing he could find was a pile of that stuff that Bess Truman took 35 years trying to get Harry to call fertilizer. So he got up on the mound, and when they came back, he gave his speech. End of it, the farmer says, that's the first time I've ever heard a Republican speech. The candidate said, that's the first time I've ever given a Republican speech from a Democratic platform. The
can be best described in a story I like. Three fellows that went out of the building to get in their car and found they'd locked the keys in. They were locked out. And one of them said, get a wire coat hanger and we can straighten it out and I can get the other one says, you can't do that. Somebody think we're stealing the car. And the third one said, well, we better do something pretty quick because it's raining, starting to rain and the top's down.
This convention brings back so many memories to a fellow like me. President Alfonso and I have much in common. We both have gone through many campaigns and asked for votes from many different kinds of people. Down in Texas, so, of course, asking for help suggests a certain degree of trust, which reminds me of a story. It has to do with a fellow that fell off a cliff and he grabbed a limb on the way down and there he hung, dangling above the rocky canyon, and he looked up and didn't see anyone, and he finally shouted out, "Oh, Lord, if you're up there, tell me what to do." And a moment later, a voice came booming down from the heavens that said, "If you have faith, let go." Well, he took another look down at those rocks 200 feet below, and looked up again and says, "Is there anyone else up there?" We're to the fourth cartoon. Now, this one, it's titled The Great Communicator, but as you can see, there's been some mistake there. They left the balloon blank, so I think that I will start filling it in. I forgot what I was going to say. Being a former Democrat myself, I know how difficult it is. We're proud to have you all with us. I have to tell you that I had started working for the party before I got around to joining it. And one night, 1962 state campaign in California, I was speaking at a fundraiser, and a woman stood up in the middle of the audience and asked me if I'd re-registered. And I said, "No, but I'm going to." She said, "I'm a registrar." She walked right down the middle aisle, put the paper up, and I signed up, and then said, "Now, where was I?" Could I just say something here about this? I'm half Irish, too. The other part is English and Scotch. But I just can't help but telling you, and you can take this with you as I'm going to take this with me. I was visiting Ireland and my father's ancestors' background and community and so forth, and then found myself on Cashel Rock, where St. Patrick erected the first cross. And the young Irish guide was taking us through the old ancient cemetery. And we came to one tombstone, and he proudly pointed out, and the tombstone was inscribed, "Remember me as you pass by, for as you are, so once was I. But as I am, you too will be, so be content to follow me." And this had proven too much for some Irish who had scratched on the stone underneath, "To follow you, I am content. I wish I knew which way you went." You know, so much of what we're trying to do, and so much of this, depended on real communications. And I can't resist. I've told this story before, and if some of you have heard it before, it illustrates communications. You'll have to forgive me, but life not only begins, or lumbago, I should say, not only begins at 40, but so does the tendency to tell the same story over and over. Something else I have to interject here, although this is not an occasion for humor. But I've had a kind of a hobby lately of collecting, by way of dissidence, stories that are told behind some of those iron curtains and those iron walls by the people themselves, showing their own cynicism about the system under which they're forced to live. And one recently that I heard had to do with 3 dogs that were having a conversation, an American dog, a Polish dog, and a Russian dog. And the American dog was telling them about how, well, he barks, and then in our country, his master gives him some meat. And the Polish dog said, "What's meat?" And the Russian dog says, "What's bark?" It reminds me of a story. In case you were wondering, this is my way of sliding into a story. Many of you here work on East-West trade issues, and I like to collect stories that I can verify that the Russian people tell among themselves, so I'm going to tell you this one. It's about General Secretary Gorbachev. Seems that as part of the campaign to straighten things out there in his country, he had issued an order that everyone caught speeding or seen speeding should get a ticket, no matter how important they might be. Well, one morning he was out at his country home and realized that he was running late for a meeting that he had in the Kremlin, and he went out to get in his car and told the driver to get in the back seat that he'd drive. And he did, and down the street he went, and they passed 2 motorcycle policemen, and one of them took off after him. And a little while later he came back and joined his companion, the other motorcycle officer, and the fellow said, "Did you give him a ticket?" And he said, "No." Well, he said, "Why not?" Well, he said, no, this was someone too important. Well, he said, "We were told to give it no matter who it was, that they were going to take." No, he says, not that. Well, he said, "Who was it?" Well, he said, I don't know. I couldn't recognize him there. But his driver is Gorbachev. I have to tell you right here, I have been collecting stories that I can absolutely establish are told by the people behind the Iron Curtain in the communist bloc. And they're stories that reveal their kind of cynicism about the system under which they live. And one of the more recent ones that I heard was about the... slander number 3. That does, I shouldn't, I know, but that does trigger another one of those stories I've picked up from over there. They came to General Secretary Gorbachev, and they told him there was a woman in the Kremlin, and she wouldn't leave unless she could see him. So he said, "Well, bring her in," and they brought her in. And he said, "Old mother, what is it? What?" She said, "I have a question." He said, "All right." She said, "Was communism invented by a politician or a scientist?" Well, he said, a politician. She said, "That explains it. A scientist would have tried it on mice first." You know, there's a story about a young fellow from the city who hired out to work on a farm during the harvest season. And the first morning, everyone was up well before dawn. The new hired hand and the farmer made their way in the dark out to the oat field, neither one of them saying a word. And finally, the city fellow asked, what kind of oats were they going to cut? Wild oats or tame oats? And the farmer, a little surprised, said, "Well, tame oats, of course. Why do you ask?" Well, he said, "I was just wondering why we're sneaking up on them in the dark." There's a story, and I understand it's true. It's about a newspaper photographer out in Los Angeles. Kind of reminds me of Howard. He was called in by his editor and told of a fire that was raging in Palos Verdes. That's a hilly area in the southern part of Los Angeles County. And the photographer's assignment was to rush down to a small local airport, board a waiting plane, go out and get some pictures of the fire and be back in time for the afternoon edition. Well, he raced down the freeway, broke all the traffic laws, got to the airport, drove his car to the end of the runway, and sure enough, there was a plane revving up its engines, ready to go. He jumped in the plane shouting, "Let's go," and they were off. At about 5,000 feet, he began getting his camera out of the bag, told the fellow flying the plane to get him over the fire so he could get his pictures and get back to the paper. And from the other side of the cockpit, there was a deafening silence. And then he heard those words he will always remember. Aren't you the instructor? You know, when I think of the welfare system, it reminds me of a story, and I know some here have heard me tell this before, and maybe everybody knows it, but pretend that you haven't heard it because I like to tell the story. It's a story about the parent with the two children and two sons, and one of them was a dyed-in-the-wool pessimist, and the other one was an incurable optimist. And they thought they were both so unrealistic that they talked to a psychiatrist about it, and he said he thought he could solve the problem. And they said, well, what? Well, he said, let's get the most magnificent set of toys any boy ever had, and we'll put him in a room. We'll take the pessimist there, and then we'll turn him loose, and when he sees those toys and knows they're all for him, he'll get over being a pessimist. Well, he said, what are you going to do about the optimist? Well, he said, I have a friend who's got a racing stable, and he said, we can get quite a quantity of what they clean out of the stable, and we'll put that in another room, and when the optimist has seen his brother get those toys, and then he gets that, he'll get over being an optimist. Well, they did it. Finally, after a period, they then went in and followed in where the boy was with the toys, and he was sitting there crying. And they said, what are you crying about? He said, well, I know somebody's going to come and take these away from me. And they went down to the room with the optimist, and he was on that top of that pile of stuff, and he was throwing it over his shoulder as fast as he could. And they said, what are you doing? He says, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere.